Today marks 1 year into Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. There's no real end in sight right now after 12 months of intense fighting. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is declaring that the war will end in 2023. I sat down with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin outside of his office at the Pentagon yesterday for his view on where the war stands, how he thinks it could end. When you look at this and you're making your assessments, do you think this ends with negotiations, or does it end on the battlefield?
Most likely, it will end with some sort of negotiation. And what the Ukrainians are interested in is getting the Russians out of their sovereign territory, and I think that's probably going to be their going-in point. But I'll let the Ukrainians speak for themselves. So.
Austin and I also discussed the threats that are posed by China and U.S.'s concerns about Beijing considering potentially providing Russia with lethal military assistance. Here's what he said. We heard recently the U.S. revealing some intelligence. They do believe China is preparing to provide potentially lethal assistance to Russia to help them in Ukraine. Tell us what you're seeing.
We've not seen any China provide any material assistance to Ukraine, to Russia at this point. China hasn't taken that off the table for sure. I've engaged my counterpart early on and told him that this would be a very bad mistake if China were to do this. It would further complicate things.
And you think they're preparing to do that?
I can't speak for the Chinese. I mean, they have tremendous capabilities, and so. Again, if they were to do that, it would be ill-advised.
When it comes to that, if they do take that step and China does move to provide lethal assistance to Russia for this, what are the consequences going to look like for China?
Well, of course, there's reputational risk, and of course, I'm sure China would love to enjoy a good relationship with all the countries in Europe, and again. If you just look at the numbers of countries around the world that really think that what Russia has done is horrible, I mean, adding to that, I think it would be a very, very ill-advised step for China to take. So.
Would it significantly help Russia, though, if they did add that? How much of a blow would that be for the Ukrainians if Russia starts getting that kind of assistance from China?
Well, again, I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but it's clear that if China has a lot of capability in terms of munitions and weapons, and if they provide substantial support to Russia, it prolongs the conflict.
With China, recently the tensions have gotten worse between the United States and China, especially after the U.S. shot down that surveillance balloon. You tried to call your Chinese counterpart, and they didn't answer.
Yeah, so Kaylin, the day that happened, my office reached out to his office to schedule a call, and they did not schedule the call.
Did that surprise you at all?
Not really. You've heard me say a number of times, Caitlin, that I think it's really, really important to make sure that we maintain lines of communication open. I think leaders need to be able to talk to each other to avoid misperceptions and manage crises, and so this is really important. And so we hope that Minister Wei will have a change of heart and schedule that call.
When was the last time you talked to him?
The last time that I talked to him was a couple of months ago. So.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I mean, how concerning is that the Secretary of Defense in the U.S. can't get your counterpart in China on the phone?
Again,
I think there's a big risk involved with that.
I think it's important to be able. And it's not like we don't have any lines of communication open. You just saw Secretary Blinken talk to his counterpart in Munich, and so there are diplomatic lines of communication open. But I think for the military, it's really, really important that we maintain open lines of communication.
And right now, there's not really one between the U.S. military and the Chinese military.
That's right. But it doesn't mean that there won't be one. So I think. We'll continue to make sure that we stress the importance of this, and hopefully Minister Wei will schedule that call. He knows where to find me.
He knows where to find you. Mm-hmm. When it comes to shooting down the balloon, what that looks like, there were questions about whether President Xi knew about exactly where the balloon was going, what it was doing. Is there a disconnect, in your sense, between the Chinese president and his own military?
That could be. I think the Chinese will have to answer that question, but it could very well be that he was not informed of what was going on.
When it comes to the U.S. response on these spy balloons, we saw several shot down within a matter of days. We haven't seen any that we know of that have been shot down in the last several days. Is that because we're not seeing any, or the United States is deciding and changing the threshold of what it's shooting down and when?
There have been no threats reported, no balloons that have been reported to me that we need to be concerned about. But we'll evaluate each case on its own merits. Caitlin, we'll assess the issue. If it's a threat, we'll deal with it. In the case of these 3 balloons that we engaged before, they were all operating in airspace that would present a hazard to civilian air traffic, and they had travel routes that passed by some of our sensitive sites. And whether or not they had the ability to collect, we don't know. But in exercising an abundance of caution, we decided to take them down.
Is that a pretty jarring blind spot, though, that the U.S. had when it came to what we learned about the balloons that actually happened during the Trump administration, that those top officials, your predecessor said they didn't know about?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've learned a lot over the years as we've continued to focus on this problem set, and certainly, we use that knowledge in analyzing what not only what happened in the past, but what's happening now and what could happen in the future. So.
And Taiwan is obviously a major part of this. There are reports that the U.S. is preparing to send more U.S. military forces to Taiwan. Is that accurate?
I won't comment on troop deployments or operations or our training. What I will tell you, Caitlin, is we remain committed to supporting Taiwan. In accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act, we're going to do everything that we can to help them acquire the means to defend themselves.
The general who's the head of Air Mobility Command recently sent a memo out saying that China and the U.S. he believed would be at war 2 years from now. He said, quote, "My gut tells me we will fight in 2025. Is that true?
What you've heard me say in the past, and I'll say it again today, is I don't see an imminent attack by China on Taiwan. But what you have to, what we can talk about what we see, and what we see is increased activity by the Chinese in the Taiwan Strait. We've seen a number of centerline crossings in the airspace. We've seen increased activity in the waters around Taiwan as China continues to try to intimidate Taiwan.
So, given that, why do you not think an attack is imminent, given you're seeing that increased activity?
There are a number of reasons that that I won't go into here, but I don't think it's in Xi's best interest to attack Taiwan at this point in time. And you have to judge them by what you're seeing. And again, we are seeing increased activity. We got to make sure that we have that we remain focused on this, and we have the ability to deter China from making a bad decision. And we will have that. We have that capability now. We will continue to have that capability.